Okay, we're starting a few minutes early today. Let's bring up the text. We're going to continue today the Sicha from Tafshin Yud, 1950, Parshas Chukas, the ninth of Sivan. Rebbe was talking about the idea of the Frierdiker Rebbe's instruction. The Frierdiker Rebbe spoke about the last theory of Beis Tammuz, that Chaim Amitim, true life, is Chaim Nitzchim, is everlasting life and doesn't end. And therefore, it's not enough to live yourself, but to give others life. Hopefully, if we finish today the Sicha, possibly, or Shekin or Shalom, if not, we'll finish it tomorrow, and then we will use Wednesday, Thursday, Friday to maybe learn a short mime around the week. Getting ready for Yud Beis Tammuz. The Rebbe says like this: Apiza yesh levar shayches l'dir v'kodesh merachami admer v'sicha anal aderech inin hachayim. So we'll understand what the Frierdiker Rebbe says about the idea of life. Nit nur was med lebt allein, nor med belebt euch andere. It's not enough that you alone are alive, you survive, but the point of it all is to give others life. Now the Rebbe says, again, this is an Hiskashrus talk. It means a talk that helps us understand in our relationship with the Rebbe, especially after Gimel Tammuz. Yehudi, when a person meets another Yid, this person could be in a situation of, so to say, in impurity that's almost the level of impurity of death. You see this person has no life, no spiritual life. It's not, you can't ignore that person. You must try to purify that person. To give that person a spiritual life. And you can do it. It's not that you can say, how could I approach this person? How could I purify this person? Where do I get the strength of it? You have it. And if you can, then you have to. Every individual. Because the Moshe of our generation, I think we did this part yesterday with Chazara, because like we said, that all the Parah Adumahs, all the red heifers take from the ash of Moshe Rabbeinu, and therefore you have the power to take your, so to say, your ash and turn it into a power that could purify someone else. Moshe Rabbeinu hat dir gegeben und gibt dir von dem Eifer von sein Parah. Moshe Rabbeinu gives you from the ash of the Parah Adumah that he first made in the desert, that the Rebbe gives us, that we should be able to take it and to add it to our ash with the Mayim Chaim and purify the next person. And therefore, it's not that you have to ask yourself, where do I have this strength? It's because you're being given strength to do it and accomplish it from the Moshe Rabbeinu of our generation. It's always all the abilities, and any time in the times of Moshe, all the way to our times, that person has the ability to engage someone else, and even a person who's too much mace is an impurity of death, and to purify that person, you have that ability from drawing from the Parah Adumah from the red heifer of Moshe Rabbeinu. Yesh l'haisef the Rebbe adds the beer, yesh l'haisef beer to add explanation. B'diak lashon Rashi. Rashi says, "Parasha asa Moshe v'midbar." That this is always going to be reminded. Everyone, you take every Parah Adumah takes from the calf, from the Parah Adumah, from the red heifer that Moshe did in the desert. So the Rebbe asked, "Why does Rashi have to tell us this?" I call Yedim. Everyone knows Moshe was the desert. Where else was he? So surely he did the desert. He did in the desert. He did the Parah Adumah. Why does Rashi have to tell us the Parah Adumah, the red heifer that Moshe did in the desert? It's obvious. Because Rashi is coming to teach us something. Even if a person's in a desert, what's a desert? A place of nachash, of snakes, saraf, of serpents, akra, of scorpion. It's like I said, we're going to later in Dvarim. And even if you're a person who's thirsty, you have no water. You can still affect purification. But to the extent the red heifer that Moshe did, like we said yesterday, that from the ash of the red heifer of Moshe Rabbeinu, the high priest throughout history, until Mashiach comes, including the time Mashiach comes, take from the ash of Moshe Rabbeinu. Where was that parah that Moshe took from, that Moshe sacrificed? That everyone draws on in all time, in all situations, is the parah that Moshe did in the desert. Shabbat Mudgesh, this is coming to teach us and to stress how important it is, and in every situation, to purify. Hashenkim Yerushalayim Shem Malin by Semes, but that's in the desert, a place where it's a place of snakes, scorpions, serpents, of thirst where you can't satisfy. Where that's because that's a place where there could be death, and therefore you have to go and purify it. Whereas in Yerushalayim, in your place of holiness, over there we know that there's a law. You're not allowed to leave a dead person overnight in Yerushalayim. So too, you can't compare Eretz Yisrael to the desert. Especially Eretz Yisrael has within it, eventually it's going to be all Yerushalayim. Like it says that Yerushalayim is going to spread across the whole Eretz Yisrael. Specifically, Moshe did the Parah outside of Eretz Yisrael, not only just outside Eretz Yisrael in a desert. And any place outside of Eretz Yisrael is like a desert. This is Zayis to add. That Nasi l'kach shaydei for hapara she'asa Moshe nasa satar shlei. That not only that Moshe, a person, no matter, even if you find yourself in the desert, you could take from Moshe's ash, from the Rebbe's ash, and purify yourself, even if you're a person who's lost and deserted in the desert spiritually. It's not enough to take from Moshe's Parah Adumah. Even if you're a person who's in the desert, which is nachash, akrav, etc., all the impurities that you find yourself in, but you have to go afterwards and burn your own Parah Adumah and put the ash of Moshe Rabbeinu and purify other people. Notwithstanding, if not too long ago, or possibly in certain extents even now, you find yourself in the desert. It's not enough to find purity and holiness for yourself. You have to find purity and holiness for the others. You take in so you can give out to others. This ability of a person, especially a person that himself or herself finds themselves in the desert, should be able to not only purify themselves, but to also to purify themselves, but also the patients themselves should make a Parah Adumah, that you should be able to purify others. The paras acheres mekachnim, that again, this idea that even in the desert you could purify others. That you take from the part of Moshe's part, and even the Kohen Gadol paras acheres mekachnim, even the high priest have to take from Moshe. The person who goes himself and purify and burns the Parah Adumah. It takes from Moshe's ash to purify themselves from that. What does this mean? This ability you have to purify others. After you yourself become pure. You're drawing from Moshe. However, a person may think, I'm so preoccupied that I'm purifying others, that you're going to forget about yourself. A person should never forget about themselves. You have to also give yourself love. As the Frierdiker Rebbe said, about with regard to yourself, don't forget about yourself. And this also we find about from the ash of Moshe. It wasn't enough that we put it for other kohanim. It wasn't enough that they use it for people to purify, but also they put away something private. We put away the teaches. Besides for helping others with the ash, that you're going to purify others from their impurities. And to purify yourself and purify others. You have to put away also for mishmeres for yourself. It means a person just has to go out there, engage others, purify others, but it doesn't mean you forget, God forbid, about yourself. Hold on 1 second. Sorry, in the middle of the day, I said we have to sometimes communicate to others. So the Rebbe says, what is the lesson? The bottom line is we have to be preoccupied in helping others, of course, but not by forgetting ourselves, like we said. But it's not enough to only work on yourself. You have to give others life. Kedivri Poetish Marachami Admer, as the Friedrich Rebbe said, Sicha Hanal, Shkol Echot Yeichel Ashbiel Shnayim Shleishim Minyanim Bnei Yisrael. Friedrich Rebbe feels that every person, he or she, has the ability to not just influence one or two people, but it's within your power to influence 2 to 3 minyanim, i.e., 20 to 30 people. Okay, now that this is getting a little personal, the Rebbe says, the Rebbe turned to someone who was at the Fabring, and again, this is on Shabbos, Chukas, Tavshin Yud 1950. This means 1950. The Kasha Yesh Lemishu, sorry, yes, 1950. Kasha Yesh Lemishu Koch Bashbal Azulis. The Rebbe turns to someone and says, if there's a person, obviously he's referring to that person, who has the ability, especially more than maybe the regular person, to be a person of influence, i.e., influence others. You have to know. You have to utilize your power of influence on others for holy things, because a person could be a person of influence for other things, God forbid. Even if the person who's receiving from you thinks they're getting something else from you, but you are a person of influence, you have to be focused that what you're giving primarily is going to be the Kedushah. Your job is to focus on giving him spirituality, even if the person thinks and the person's gravitating towards you, trying to get other things. The Rebbe is talking in public. He says, I'm sure you're not going to mind if I talk publicly what you used to do as far as communal work. Assuming this person was a business person. So the person has influence in business. The Rebbe is saying you used to be a person that would do Torah mitzvahs. You were involved in askanis, in work, in influencing in Torah mitzvahs and chassidus. Even though now people want to engage with you because you're a successful business person, the Rebbe says this person's name is well known, so obviously we're talking about a person of influence. Your initial work of public influence was in things of chassidus. I'm assuming it was that the person now came into money. Maybe he just came into other levels of influence. So the Rebbe says, when Friedrich Rebbe lived in Warsaw, means in Poland. And Nasi he left from his home. The Friedrich Rebbe left his home for a few weeks. At some point, the Chassidim were able to get a hold of the Friedrich Rebbe's key that was to his private drawers, his cupboard, his filing cabinet. They made a copy of it. So even though the Friedrich Rebbe evidently took the key, they had a copy. And they found someone to go and take out the letters, all the private documents of Friedrich Rebbe, which were on Chassidus, so that we could print them down. And this person who's sitting at the Vabring, and the Rebbe said, your job was, you wrote the Chassidus down. He took a lot of private manuscripts of the previous Rebbe that were published, and he wrote them down kind of secretly, so they should have copies of it. And the Rebbe says, this was your first communal work. The merit that you did that. That what happened was it was evidently a fire, maybe the bombing of the Germans. And the only way they have copies of these documents is because they were able to steal a key and make a copy and open up and maybe without permission to what's called the Chassidish Geneva to go and write down the Ksavim, to write down the letters. The Rebbe says once many of documents of letters and Ksavim were burned by the Tzemach Tzedek. And he found, he asked the Chassidim, did you at least steal the key and write down these documents, these Ksavim, these manuscripts? And they said no. So Neneva Gevald, he said, Oy, Gevald, why didn't you steal them and write them down? Like this, we would have had them. Ilu ganaftim, had you taken them, I also would have enjoyed. I love this Zachar. The Rebbe says this person you have to remember. Where you started to be a person of influence in the community. Was with Chassidish things. We have to work. If you're a person of influence now, you have to use it for only holy things. The Rebbe continues. This idea that a person has to bring down everlasting life within holiness is also connected to a chassan and a groom who gets an aliyah in the Torah before his marriage. Aliyah Torah, the idea of getting called up to the Torah. In Yonah, the idea is hamshachas taisvus chayis nischas the Kedushah. Why does a person get called up to the Torah before he gets married? Because it adds holiness, and especially in an important time of their life of marriage. Aside for Shabbos itself that gives holiness to a person, but the getting an aliyah on Shabbos of the Torah, it gives even more holiness. That the everlasting life is given to us through Torah. Where do we get true holiness? It's from everlasting holiness, is from the infinite, from Torah. In order to have everlasting happiness between the chassan and the kala, the groom and the bride, and then to build a family that continues on until Mashiach, is from getting an aliyah of Torah, because in the Torah, in the aliyah of Torah, we have the koach of Ein Sof. Dor Yisharim Yivarach, to have many generations of blessing, banim, bnei banim, children and grandchildren. Basically, Torah mitzvahs, not just that you have children, but that you learn Torah. And these mitzvahs, through building families, Jewish families. That's the revelation of infinite within creation. That's why also, till today, we get an aliyah in the Rebbe's room. Because if it's in a moment of empowerment, in a moment of everlasting, where do you want to do that moment? In the room of the Rebbe. That same room that the Rebbe davened and learned. That's where he became, the Rebbe connected his essence with the essence of others in the Yechidus, the combination that there's an more everlasting energy in the Rebbe's room, in a room where there's Yechidus, which Yechida, we know the Yechida, the Nefesh is everlasting. And so that is also infused in the chassan and the groom who gets an aliyah before his wedding, to infuse that energy into his marriage and into the couple's marriage and building a family of everlasting Torah mitzvahs. Chaim amitim lihafsek, a true life without any ending, liyaysa, chadurim b'kedushah she'ein sof, that should be permeated with holiness of the infinite. We'll finish the Sicha. With regard in general to the holiday of Yud Beis Tammuz, again, the day the Frierdiker Rebbe was released from the entire imprisonment, means no longer to have to be in exile. He wrote, the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote a letter. Not only was I personally, the Frierdiker Rebbe, redeemed on the 12th of Tammuz. Whoever loves, whoever finds Torah precious to them, this was a freedom for them. Those who keep mitzvahs, even if you just call yourself a yid, that's a freedom for you. The Rebbe says one condition for redemption is the first has to be an imprisonment. You're redeemed from a situation of imprisonment. So if the redemption is for whole Klal Yisrael, we must say the idea of imprisonment that also affects Klal Yisrael. What's the idea of being imprisoned and then getting redeemed? The idea is not to get rid of the negative, to go back to where you were before, because that's no point. What's the whole point of being in prison and then get redeemed to go back to square one? The whole point is that now you're doing better than had you never been arrested, because of the gula that comes after, the redemption that comes after the imprisonment. As it's brought down in the teachings of Chassidus, the whole point of the contraction of godliness in order to create the world is to have a revelation. The idea is not just to reveal the way godliness was before the contraction, then what's the whole point of creation? What's the whole point of the contraction? It has to be a greater light. That the only way to get to this greater light is after the Tzimtzum. When we break through the darkness, we're bringing a greater light than the light that was there before. If not for the contraction, not for the negative, you never get to a higher positive. It means in order to get to higher places, you have to go down sometimes. So the Rebbe says, same thing applies to the breaking of the vessels and the sin of the tree of knowledge. Because only after impurity became part of our avodah, we had to be mevar and refine the impurity. Like it's Alter Rebbe says, from Eitz Hadas, until the people ate from the Eitz Hadas, we had no connection to impurity. Then through that specifically, we could bring more light. The dogmas by tshuva is like the benefit of tshuva. It's not just that tshuva fixes. We're just starting to get to tshuva today in Tanya. It's not just that the tshuva fixes the things that are negative. There's no even memory of something negative. It has to be even more than better than where you were before you sinned. That's why where tzaddik stands. Tzaddik can't stand in the place where Baal Tshuva is. The Baal Tshuva is much greater because the Baal Tshuva is sin and is able to bring the greater light through Tshuva. So too with the redemption and the imprisonment. Surely by the Frierdiker Rebbe and also by Chassidim, there was a great things happening before there was the arrest. Even though we still have agendas. Things we didn't finish yet. We were always worthy of good flow. And there was no place for places of negativity. The Rebbe writes in Terror, the whole idea of pain in this world, suffering in this world. It's not possible that only because of sin, that's why we have to suffer and we have to have a lack of peace and tranquility in our life. Why? Even Nebuchadnezzar, the great Russia, the destroyer of the first temple, he walked 3 steps for God's honor. He wrote the letter, the Gemara Sanhedrin says, he said, you have to write the better title of God. He was given to rule the world, and 3 of his and 3 generations afterwards, just because he took 3 steps. The Rebbe says, surely every Yid has more sichos than Nebuchadnezzar. And therefore, everything, the whole positive of the world should be for every Yid. So why do we have negative? The negative is because through the negative, we get to a greater positive that we have to get only through this path. After the imprisonment. But now that we have the redemption, not only do we have to fix the small things like our agendas, we should reach the highest of all levels. Okay, we finished this talk. And we're going to go afterwards, maybe tomorrow, the next day, we'll start with the Maimer for Rebbe Thomas.